Yo, 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 yo. What is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder. And today, I want to talk to you about how the idea of trying to be number one, whether that's for a player, an alliance, a kingdom, is and can negatively impact the everyday player's day-to-day experience. This is something that I've always wanted to touch on, and some of the points I'm going to bring up I have mentioned or have spoke about in other aspects. But this is something that, more so to me, if I kind of had to rank them for player, alliance, kingdom on which ones really are kind of, most to least impactful, even though they all factor into this idea of the day-to-day player experience, just, I don't want to say becoming crippled, but getting to a point in which if you really pay attention and you notice what's happening, it can be a drastic turnoff. And the priority order I would go in is most likely that of alliance, player, kingdom. And I'll explain as well, right? So let's start with the kind of kingdom level. We'll talk about player, and then we'll go to alliance. And we'll explain and give you some examples for each point. So one is kingdom, or I guess three technically is kingdom. And the way that this can potentially affect your day-to-day experience is, let's say, and I'm not going to give you a million examples, right? But I'll give you some of the highlights, if not one or two, to kind of hammer home each of these. On a kingdom level, when you're striving to be number one, I'm sure some of you have played in other kingdoms for other kingdom builders, and some kingdoms may operate in a way that says, well, we only want to recruit fighters, and the only way we're going to let you in one of our active alliances, if you migrate here or don't migrate here, is if you meet a certain kill threshold. Excuse me. If you meet a certain kind of KD threshold, right? Or you have a certain amount of deaths, or you have a certain amount of T3, T4, T5 kills. Obviously, we don't have that type of specific breakdown in Call of Dragons yet, but you could go off of things like deaths. You could also go off of merit points. Right? These are things that can factor into, one, the types of players that may come into a kingdom or may want to come into a kingdom. And if your player drop-off is exceeding the rate in which you are gaining new players coming in, then that can still leave you at a net negative. So having an understanding where you're looking, now bear in mind, not every kingdom really is so well put together, or is at a point, let me say that, is at a point where they are operating, thinking, and doing things as a kingdom, right? As a unified entity. And because of that, obviously, those kingdoms are more at risk, right? It's a little bit more of an uphill battle for those compared to kingdoms that are unified and are really thinking in a type of unison way or uniform way across all of the alliances, or we could say all the active alliances. But when you're thinking about kingdom decisions and the impact that if you're looking or striving to be the top dog or the number one, and you're constantly always recruiting the maybe your vision is, we just want to recruit the best players and we just want to have the strongest of the strong, right? Those kind of come with its own, pros and cons in that. But if you incredibly limit the type of players that you may have come in, right, then you kind of just have to be content with knowing that, well, okay, if we're just going to have one or two active alliances, or one, two, or three, and that's going to be it, then that's fine, right? If you end up maybe not being able to do certain things because you just might not have enough overall activity to do them. One example could be like doing fun war games where you simulate 2v2 scenarios, 3v3s, 1v3s, 1v2s, right? Doing things that you're able to because you have an extremely high quantity or amount of active players within a kingdom, that it allows you to do these types of fun things compared to just having one or two kind of mega alliances that you're running in a kingdom. But again, that to me, I think, kind of covers a little bit of some of the challenges when you think about what happens at a kingdom level, because if you're only recruiting certain players, then that can still alienate some of the either lower powered players or the ones that, may not necessarily be able to get into a Vanguard alliance or an alliance that's going to be doing a lot of fighting, especially if they want to, because maybe you're just only pushing that mindset along with what you're recruiting in your kingdom at that level. You may even just make, even migration aside or recruiting aside, maybe your goals and standards in that kingdom is, well, we only want to have one or two alliances that are going to be kind of the mega alliance Vanguard, frontline fighters, without even having anything to do with migration and recruitment. And then that can also alienate players. That will factor and create player drop-off, because now it's not being as inclusive as others. Now, that's not to say that every kingdom out there is doing it, but some are, and it is something that can happen. And bear in mind, this is just one way, or I guess one or two ways, right, that you may view a kingdom limiting and how it is affecting the day-to-day or the everyday player, right, that is playing there, that not only is looking to continuously keep developing their account, but also get to a point where they can contribute, they can be impactful. And sometimes you'll find in situations where you are almost denied those opportunities because of the way that a kingdom is kind of prioritizing itself versus and or just when comparing to other kingdoms. Number two, let's talk about players. Players, to me, this is, like I said, probably the second most impactful area, because this is the one that is a little bit less reliable on knowing or being able to kind of gauge an average trend amongst everyone. I mean, sure, we can say that there's certain things that players will tend to do, but unlike the type of kingdom situation where you're basically having either one person or a few people that are making that decision and it affects everyone, right? Every player is their own individual who's making their own individual decision, right? So where you have an individual who's looking, and this obviously not everyone is looking to be number one or to be a top player, but you may have players that are looking to do, and we've mentioned this before, the whole ladder climbing effect, where you'll have players that will try to work their way up the ladder, and they're trying to find themselves in a better position than where they currently are. And that can be from a couple of ways, right? Usually, it is at a baseline, just trying to get into a stronger alliance. But oftentimes, you may find that if they're unable to get into the number one alliance, right, then they may just go into the strongest alliance, right? This is kind of the backup, the strongest alliance that they're able to get into, right? Instead of not being able to get into the number one alliance. I'm sure a lot of players would love to be in a number one alliance in any kingdom, right? And this is the funny part about this is that, and tell me, and I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on this one, which is how there, and I may make a separate video on this because this is hilarious to me. How you'll be in some kingdoms, or specifically you'll be talking with certain alliances that are number one, and they almost have it in their mind that the reason why some players want to join is because their alliance is number one. As though to say that because they are the ones who are leading, they are the ones who are the officers, they're doing all these amazing things and people want to join. When in reality, which is not to take away from if they are or if they're not, but in reality, it's a lot more simpler than that, a lot more simplistic than that, in that really, what they're looking to do is to join the number one alliance because they're just simply the number one alliance. And the idea, which is, again, kind of an average approach when you just think about kingdom builders, is that typically the number one alliance, doesn't matter who's leading it, doesn't matter who's in it, usually will attract more of the 1%, right? Meaning that you're attracting more of the top players, the strongest players. I mean, look, if you could fit the top 150 players into one alliance, I'm sure some alliances would do that, like just without a doubt in my mind. And so this is more to say that it's really because of more of a position visual, than it is, oh, well, the leadership is just amazing. It's the best I've ever seen. I don't care that they're the number one alliance. I just want to be a part of this group, right? Now, you may have some alliances that may be able to work themselves up to the number one position or to a top position because of those traits and characteristics and work ethics that you see being done. I've seen this happen before. But I just wanted to make that little side note there, because it always is funny to me when I hear from players who are like, oh, I run the best alliance, right? And, we do things better than everyone else. And when in reality, what can happen and what usually happens is the moment that you establish yourself as the number one alliance, if you're able to do it within a certain kind of inflection point, based on the age of a kingdom early on, it gives you an advantage, and almost a continued advantage, because you're still in the number one position. So really, if you think about it, getting to the number one position, it's just a matter of clicking accept, removing the lowest powered people and accepting the highest powered people, right? And you basically have a very high percentage chance of maintaining that position and that advantage, and more of the stronger players wanting to join, right? That's a very simplistic way of putting it, but in reality, it really is that easy for it to be done, right? Especially if you just kind of stay on top of it, for the most part, I should say. But then we get to, right, how does this really affect the everyday player? Well, when it comes to an individual who's looking to try and be the number one, right, the top one player, to be a part of the number one alliance in this case, right, the player perspective and approach is, well, I've heard this happen in alliances where players will say, oh, well, this alliance isn't as competitive for me, right? I love when I hear that one, just because it's downright hilarious to me, right? It's, oh, I need to go find a more competitive alliance for myself, right? Which is just essentially a fancy, political way or diplomatic way of saying that, oh, I just want to join the strongest alliance, or I just want to join a stronger alliance. Like that's really all it is, right? / I want to go in an alliance that has more chests that are being purchased, more forts that are being done, right? I want to go and be an alliance that's most likely going to get an elite frame, etc., right? It's usually for more of those preferred reasons, right? I don't want to say selfish, because that would just come off aggressive, and it's not always that, but it is because of these individual views that some players will have on what is important for them. Which is, again, not to say it's great or bad. It is what it is. But when it comes to the negative effect that happens from the everyday player, is that when you have individuals that are, let's just say, volatile movers, right? Meaning that they're looking to try and move at any point or chance that they can. The after effects, right? Which is not saying they're doing these things on purpose, but the after effects of them is that if you see player movement, this can do certain things that I've seen, and I'll give you another example here, which is that they can snowball. If you see a player move and they go to another stronger alliance, let's say that player has friends in that alliance, so that player knows some people. They move to this alliance, they join the stronger one, they have conversations with that new alliance, and they say, hey, I have some friends in this other alliance, they may be interested in come, can you make some room? They say, sure, we can make some room. Then those players leave. And then those players will leave the alliance and join the one that person went to. Or if they see someone leave, they may think to themselves, oh, well, where did that person go? Oh, he went here. Okay, well then maybe some of those players will get it in their minds to say, well, let me reach out and message the leader or officers of this stronger alliance and see if they can maybe make some room for me, right? And it essentially just kind of leads to this constant, like we mentioned, ladder climbing effect, where people are constantly trying to move on an individual level. And then from there, this is what can create situations of low player activity, low, I guess you could say high turnover, right? Or maybe decent sized turnover between some of maybe just because they're lower powered, we could say some of the lower powered or lower ranked alliances, even though it doesn't mean that just because you're lower powered or lower ranked that you are inactive at any means, right? I've seen kingdoms that have phenomenal activity from the first 10 alliances. But I've also seen situations where you have 10 alliances that are incredibly active, but because the player movement from some can be volatile, you will have situations where now all of a sudden 9 and 10 maybe are noticing there's a lot of shift and a lot of movement, and they're losing some activity, and they think to themselves, okay, well, maybe we should merge at this point, right? Well, you've basically gone from 10 alliances down to 9. At that point. And that in and of itself, right, and we'll talk about this kind of during the alliance section, but that can become its own snowball effect, right? So you kind of have to think about this. And then the effect it has on the everyday player is that, well, what if you're one of those players that didn't move. You just kind of hung out in your alliance, right? You're kind of punished in this situation because either a merge comes or maybe there's not as much activity as you noticed before. And maybe in your mind, right, this can be a little bit of a turnoff, right? Maybe you guys aren't able, because some players left, to do things like, elite frames, or maybe you just can't even capture some behemoths, right? Maybe you're not getting a lot of people to show up. Maybe you can't even capture a pass. These are things that can lead to poor player experiences. Okay, now let's talk about the last one, which is the big mumbo jumbo, alliances. So, when it comes to why alliances are the number one impact factor into the idea of trying to be number one, and then how that can negatively affect the everyday player, affect up to the everyday player, is that as an alliance, you, in short, are the most impactful element within a kingdom when it comes to trying to be number one. Why? Well, because for most part, players have to join alliances to do quite a few things in the game, right? An example is you can't move from one zone to another if you're not in an alliance, and that alliance doesn't control a pass and or just have territory specifically in a farther or deeper zone if you want to try and move there. So you'd have to join no matter what. If you want to be able to get alliance credits to make purchases in stores, you can't do that. If you want to be able to get buffs and passive stats from just to increase your power, right? Joining alliances, you need to be able to do that. Being able to take advantage of villages, right? Joining alliances. There's quite a few reasons. Receiving RSS transfers, right? The list goes on. And so, because you have to join an alliance, and because at the end of the day, the number of alliances that are a part of a union, a group, some type of ally, really kind of makes up the controlling interest in a kingdom, right? You could say that because of that, you then are able to kind of make things like kingdom decisions. A lot of these things kind of fall back on this common denominator of alliances. But when it comes specifically to the impact that we're talking about, is that as an alliance, I've never seen an alliance. Let me just start off here. I've never seen an alliance that says, oh, well, we don't care if you guys don't play the game at all and don't power up. Never have I heard that in my life, right? And so, because the idea is that every player is obviously trying to get stronger, right? They're trying to progress. They're trying to get a little better. And due to this, the average power on a day-to-day basis for the alliance is getting stronger, right? They are powering up. With the, maybe not a want, but more so, or not a need, but I should say not a need, but probably more of a want, where alliances would like to keep getting stronger, keep climbing up the ranking boards. And if they're able to be number one, sure. I mean, who wouldn't want to be the number one alliance, right? At some point in time, let's say, to kind of keep it conservatively broad or open-ended, or open, I should say. And so because of this, if you are in a situation where your alliance is looking to be number one or looking to be top dog, you have to think about, well, how are you going to become number one, right? You're either going to do things like setting, power requirements or power up requirements or certain thresholds that players have to hit. You're going to go out there and recruit players, whether that's ones that are on the open market because they're not in an alliance, or recruiting players that in our alliances, right? Or that are in other alliances. That sounded weird the first time. And so, this can also be viewed as things like poaching, right? That can cause rifts and challenges with other alliances. You may look to do things like merge opportunities, where maybe you merge with a stronger alliance or maybe a lower powered alliance that is able to boost you up, kind of giving you renewed activity and a little bit more power. And eventually, if you're doing these things, you can, depending on how you go about it, leave a wake of just misfortune, let's say, right, or unintended consequences in your path. And those are things that can affect. And I'll give you one example. Let's say you're trying to do a merge, and you and this other alliance have good activity, but you know that if you were to combine your strongest players and their strongest players, you guys could make a serious push up the boards. Well, what do you think the negative impact there is? Well, the negative impact is all the players that are left behind, right? Because essentially at that point, what usually happens when we see those types of merges go down is that they'll fulfill kind of the top 50%, right? And then the bottom 50% will stay in one of the other alliances or one of the other shells, as we call them. And then those players can then get it into their mind that, okay, well, hey, we're just the B team, right? Or we're the second string, if you will. You know, and sure, they may tell you, well, once the alliance increases capacity, we'll try and bring more players over, and maybe they do. But it doesn't always mean that you're going to be able to fit everyone in. So then they may say, well, okay, well, you know, if you guys can't join us or you want to go join another stronger alliance for the time being, you know, feel free. And then, of course, you know, we'll try to get you in when we can, right? Which, you know, makes sense, kind of a logical backup plan. But when you do things like this, because you have leftovers, if you will, or a kind of overfill, it can leave a bad taste in people's mouths. And oftentimes, when you're thinking about the health of your alliance, most of the times what typically takes over is the want to do something rather than do I need to do this. And so then we kind of get to the big last kahuna, which is, or the big last mabamba here, is, you know, when you're trying to always be a number one alliance, you are inherently kind of going down this mega alliance path that can lead to you doing things such as, you know, removing lower powered players and bringing in higher powered players, right? To either push for one or to maintain and sustain the number one position. And the effects that these can have on the everyday player is that you can put yourself in a situation where you can easily go from having 10 active alliances to 5 active alliances because you're condensing, you're trying to funnel all the either top players, active players, whatever other additional criteria you're going with as well, up the ladder. And this is kind of creating a pyramid instead of a rising tide, right? That's kind of lifting all boats in some type of a balanced or balanced-ish way. And that can cause a number of players to say, well, this is pretty rough, right? Or I have to go and do all this extra movement, or why can't I go play with these people? Or, you know, why is it that we were left out and just kind of said, hey, just fend for yourselves at this point, right? There's a lot of responses and reactions that can, I want to say happen, but elicit, right, from the average player on when these things happen. How it can also affect them is that you may have situations where things change at an alliance or cross-alliance and kingdom level from shifts that happen within a kingdom where maybe you, for example, maybe one day it's cool, we're doing, you know, we're not having any type of free-for-all PvP to all of a sudden now, right, maybe you guys are doing like organized war games or something like that. And then the next shift, because you're having alliance shifts and maybe some regime shifts, and now all of a sudden it's free-for-all PvP across the entire kingdom. Right, those are things that I've seen happen in quite a few kingdoms, even some of my own projects. And those are things that will drastically affect how a player views if they want to play there in that kingdom or not, let alone even just keep playing the game, right? Because you have to think about not only the time investment, the emotional investment, potentially the monetary investment that some players are putting in. And if they see things that are being done a certain way for a while, when they start to see things like quick changes or radical shifts in standards or goals or policies that were being done and that are now being done, those are also things that can create player drop-off. And obviously it doesn't help necessarily that the game as a whole isn't really, at the moment, let's say, completely geared towards player sustainability and reducing the amount of player drop-off, right? Where you're trying to have a high amount of player retention and a high level of player replayability within your game, right? To be fair, and this isn't just a CoD challenge, right? This is a kingdom builder challenge where there really hasn't been a kingdom builder out on the market yet that has really kind of put this first and foremost, right? Where the game itself is really, because you have to think about it. If you're able to have, like, for the average retention we probably see in a game, if let's say we have 20,000 players that are loaded in, after the first season, you're probably down to a couple thousand, right? I would estimate at that point. And this is just kind of based on what I've seen for the number of kingdoms that I've played. And we're just talking averages, right? Not necessarily what may be specific to your kingdom. And then probably after the second season, you might be down to maybe 1,000, 2,000, right? Somewhere around there. Third season, you're probably closer to 1,000, if not less than. Right, and then you're kind of looking at, oh, well, you're the first year of playing, right? It's probably somewhere still around that 1,000. And again, this is just depending on how much recruiting you're doing as well, right? That can kind of be a factor for plus or minus. But if your kingdom starts off healthy, that's kind of what I usually see. Now, when you're thinking about it from a game development standpoint, well, from a game developers, you want as many players to be playing your game as possible, right? Because why? The more players that are playing your game and the longer that players are playing your game for, and the less and the less amount of players that are leaving means that there's a higher chance that more people will spend money on your game. And the more people that play, the more people that have the chance to refer to even more people. So, if you're really thinking about building something to try and make the most amount of money, then it really makes sense to have the most amount of people playing the game and the most amount of people to continue playing the game with the least amount of drop-off, right? But you don't really see that in pretty much any kingdom builder at this moment, because you don't necessarily have the developers that are coming out and saying things like that. And this isn't a slight at any developer. It's just this is what the current market is at the moment. And you don't have them coming out and saying, like, I'll give you one example. If they provided a tutorial on alliances, where as a leader you would get a tutorial tip or something like that that specifically says, it could specifically say something to the effect of, you've been running your alliance for a week now. It may be a good idea to reach out to other alliances. Or, for example, let's say before the level 1 pass is open, right? If you're going in to see, if you're season 1, and before the level 1 pass is open to go cross or level 2 passes, you would get a notification a week before that as the leader, maybe as officers, and it would say, hey, as a tip, because you're an alliance leader, it may be a good idea to consider reaching out to other alliances to whether it be for diplomacy, to gauge whether or not they may be friendly or hostile upon you potentially encountering them down the road, right? Which isn't really telling you how to play. It's more saying, as a reminder, hey, if you haven't communicated or contacted with this person yet, just to figure out where they are, right? It's not saying you need to go down this path or go down this path. It's just giving you a tip on saying, hey, it may be a good idea to just find out if you need to prepare for war or if you guys are going to be friendly. Like, that's a great tip to do, but those are the types of things that you don't see being done, from my knowledge, in any kingdom builder that I've played or have seen or have heard of right now. And again, this is such a bigger topic, so I'm not going to jam and really go down the rabbit hole here, but I just wanted to state that because I felt it was really important. So anyways, like I said, a couple points, a couple other topics that we've touched on, kind of weaved, if you will, into this video. But now I'm going to pass the question off to you guys because I really want to know. Have you played in an alliance, in a kingdom, or if you've just been a player and you have seen moments where instances have happened of those that are trying to be number 1, to be top dog, dogs or cats, kittens, if you will. Gotta obviously give a shout out to my lovely ladies out there. And you've seen things just go kind of haywire, or things did not go as intended, or things had unforeseen repercussions that factored into something affecting the everyday player, whether that was in a negative way, whether that was in a change that they didn't like, regardless if they kept playing or not, or something that factored into players leaving, whether that's migrating out of the kingdom or just stopping to play. I'd love to know. So let me know in the comments down below. That's going to do it for me. As always, until next time, I will catch you later.